So, as grateful as I am to be back in the auditorium, I've never been entirely comfortable up here at the podium, so I'm really happy to move ahead. Grateful to introduce the first session, which will be moderated by Dr. Dorothy Phillips, a leader for science and human rights in the US and around the world. Dr. Phillips serves on the board of directors of the American Chemical Society, which is a member of the Science and Human Rights Coalition, and has organized this session. Thank you. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, challenges in the right to science and scientific publishing space. Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome to this plenary. As Teresa said, entitled Russia's Invasion of Ukraine, Challenges in the Right to Science and Scientific Publishing Space. As I was previously introduced, I will just say that I am a member from the American Chemical Society and also a member of the AAAS Science and Human Rights Coalition Steering Committee for the ACS. And I thank you for joining us both in person and virtually. This plenary, which was organized by ACS with some assistance from our friends at AAAS, will have presentations from a variety of experts with diverse backgrounds. They will speak to the immense and devastating impact on the people of Ukraine due to the invasion by Russia. But before I begin, I will give a few facts about the American Chemical Society in case you're not familiar with our organization. So the American Chemical Society was founded in 1876 and chartered by the US Congress, and it is the world's largest scientific organization. The ACS vision and mission are the guiding forces for all our activities, programs, products, and services. And as you can see, our vision is improving people's lives through the transforming power of chemistry. Our mission, advancing the broader chemistry enterprise and its practitioners for the benefit of Earth and its people. Just to give a little bit of ACS by the numbers. When it comes to our, so ACS has programs to promote the chemical sciences and help our members to grow professionally. A few examples includes highlighting the 11,000 high school students that are financially supported by our Project C program that provides financial support for over 50 years to low-income students. When it comes to our journals, ACS has published 8,700 articles authored by chemistry Nobel laureates, which is one of the most prestigious honors a chemist can receive, that they were just announced recently for this year. In 2018, our journals articles were cited more than 3.4 million times and were downloaded over 130 million. The CAS has over 150 million unique chemical substances in its registry, which identifies and aggregates chemical substance information. The CAS registry is the world's largest curated database of unique chemical substances. And the lower half of the slide shows that we have over 152,000 members and over 140 countries. So we're definitely an American but international society. So to help us to meet and work together, we have our local sections and our international chapters, in addition to the technical divisions. And these divisions connect their members to the people and information they need to advance in their respective fields of chemistry. And this includes the Division of Environmental Chemistry. Speaking of our work in science and human rights, we began to monitor the violation of human rights in the 1980s. We moved that program to an ACS board level, and I have been representing it from the board level since 2014. Case monitoring is a oops, this goes faster. Continues part of our program, but we also do things from an educational and inviting our members to get involved. Speaking a little bit more about the science and human rights area, before I begin our speakers, I would like to add a few facts there, kind of following up what Teresa had said earlier. The human right to science is articulated in 2 or 3 foundational human rights documents: the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 1966 International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. In the words of the covenant, everyone has a right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress and its applications. We did not pay a lot of attention to this right to science in the past decades, but the immediate 2 past decades, the scientific community, definitely including the AAAS Science and Human Rights Coalition, has increasingly embraced the right's importance and worked to advance it, including spelling out what it means in practice, leading to our UN General Comment on the Right to Science in 2020. So we won't go into any more detail here, but it emphasizes the public access to and participation in science and its benefits and application. The fact that the right isn't just for scientists, but for everyone. Now, turning to our session, what happened to people's ability to enjoy this right when the Ukrainian researchers and ordinary citizens lost their homes, their labs, even their lives? Russia's invasion of Ukraine posed many human challenges, including for the right to science. As we have seen since February, Ukrainians have and continue to have upheaval, high loss of human life, destruction of homes and property, and high economic costs. And the Ukrainian scientists, like the rest of the citizens there, have had to face this situation. So now we will hear from several speakers on this, and they will speak to the current conditions for Ukraine and Ukrainian scientists. And then we will transition to the impact and implementations to this right to science and freedom to publish to Ukrainian scientists, as well as the Russian and Belarusian scientists. So lastly, our speakers will address the efforts by ACS and the U.S. National Academies to support Ukrainian scientists and Ukraine's scientific arena, as well as how each of us can support Ukrainian scientists and citizens. So I will introduce each speaker as it's their turn to present, and I thank our speakers for being present today in person and virtually. So we'll have 1 virtual speaker and we have 3 in-house. And then after they speak, we will have our Q&A period of time, and those who are online might want to start thinking about their questions so they can be brought forward, and those here can just rise in the microphones and ask their questions. So let us begin. I will first introduce Dr. Andriy Nishadin. Andriy Nishadin obtained his bachelor's and master's degree from Ivan Franko National University in 2013 and 2014, respectively. During high school and graduate years, he won several chemistry Olympiads, which motivated him to join the PhD program at the University of Chicago. After receiving his PhD in 2020, Andriy joined Continuum Pharmaceutical in the greater Boston area, where as a process chemistry scientist, he develops process suitable for integrated continuous manufacturing of active pharmaceutical ingredients. Let us welcome.
Thank you, Dorothy, for this kind introduction. My name is Andriy Nishadin. I am pleased to meet you all today. And I would like to bring a human perspective to the troubles and challenges that Ukrainian scientists face in this difficult and arduous time. I myself had a surreal experience at the end of my education in Ukraine. It was 2014 and 2013, end of the year, when we had what we call now revolution of dignity. It was famous Maidan protests against corrupt President Yanukovych, who changed foreign policy 180 degrees and decided that instead of moving Ukraine to democracy and European integration, he should try to join corrupt Russian regime. People did not like it, and they protested a lot. And I vividly remember, as I was applying for graduate programs in the US, as I was going to my professors to ask for recommendation letters, and as a throng of people was walking towards me, chanting, protesting creeds, and it was interesting and inspiring to see people wake up and defend their rights. But also it was terrifying in the light of human sacrifices that came afterwards. In Kiev, in Maidan Square, over 100 people were murdered by forces of the regime. And we call them Heavenly 100. Those moments were terrifying for everyone in the country because no one knew how it would all turn out. And no one could imagine 8 years of war. As I got accepted to the University of Chicago and got my acceptance letter and was very happy, Russia annexed Crimea and started the war in eastern Ukraine. Impact on scientists basically began with that. I knew personally a dean of chemical department in Donetsk, and he was heartbroken how he either had to abandon his lab, all the chemicals that he has made with his own hands, and just flee his city. And the same applied to a lot of researchers and graduate students who had to upend their lives even back then. Over the past 8 years, this war has been going on and off, but mostly it was localized to the east of Ukraine. And lastly, this February, we have witnessed a full-scale invasion, basically from all sides of the border with Ukraine and even Belarus. And it is difficult to express the sheer terror and uncertainty that this brings. And I am here, I am safe. So for me, it was much easier than for people who were on the ground, who lived there. And many people paid different levels of price. You have millions who lost their savings. You have thousands who lost their jobs. And then you have those who have lost their lives and paid the ultimate price. I would like to bring two names in particular. One is Alexander Kortsyn, who was a professor of inorganic chemistry at Karazin National University in Kharkiv. He has lost his life under Russian missiles, which indiscriminately attacked apartments and buildings where people lived, so no strategic infrastructure. And another name that I would bring is Andrei Kravchenko. Andrei Kravchenko was a chemist at the Academy of Sciences of Ukraine at the Kiev National University. He worked on solid-state chemistry and physics, especially of silicon surfaces, and he volunteered to defend his country with arms in his hands. When he joined the army, like what he worked on before, and he told them about his scientific work. So that way he got a nickname Kremin, which means silicon in Ukrainian. So I would say each one of us can think of what would be our nickname based on our research if we were put in a situation when we had to defend our way of life with arms in our hands. The ultimate price was paid by many, but many more were affected by different disturbances that the work has brought. I have a friend, Maria, who was a scientist in pharmaceutical sciences. She was making compounds for medicinal chemistry and structural activity relationships. And actually, at the time before invasion, she was switching her jobs. There was a newly founded institute in Odessa, in the south of Ukraine. And she was transitioning from postdocs to her beginning of her full-time and actual academic career. And when the invasion happened, this project was canceled. Obviously, they could not bring more investments. And basically, she had to start looking for another job because she lost hers. She transitioned to a postdoc position in Germany as a Helmholtz Institute of Pharmaceutical Research. And I think her story greatly exemplifies all the troubles that Ukrainian scientists face. So on one level, you have the difficulty to doing research in the lab that is under-equipped. And then war happened and you do not have even that. And you have to seek better fortunes abroad. And even now, as she kind of settled, she still faces great uncertainty because she even cannot know if she can sign the next lease contract, as the project she's in she's working on is very short timed, only for 6 months, and she cannot know if it will be renewed or not. And many Ukrainian scientists who have emigrated due to the war face similar circumstances. All the accommodations and projects are very short-lived, and there is no any certainty in future and what tomorrow will bring. And people literally don't know in which country they will be half a year from now. And you cannot plan your life around that or try to achieve some scientific goals if you don't have certainty of how much time you can work on a particular project. It is difficult to estimate how many scientists exactly fled Ukraine. Some numbers that are thrown around are on the order of tens of thousands. It is believable since we know for sure that millions, about 6 million have crossed the border. The only peer-reviewed numbers that I could find was that in 19 days of war from the beginning, over 6,300 Ukrainian scientists moved away. And this number is huge, and it is especially large in comparison with long-term trends that Ukrainian science has faced even before the invasion. Overall, there was stagnation, which can be exemplified by the steady decrease in number of researchers employed at universities and as the National Academy of Sciences and different institutes. There was also increase in age of the researchers as younger people more and more moved abroad for graduate schools, guilty as charged. And this overall picture was reflected as well by the steady decrease in funding that Ukrainian scientists felt in their labs and universities. But not to paint a grim picture, on the whole picture of decrease in quality and quantity of science, there were bright spots and pockets of success. And they were both in academia and industry. I would like to bring a particular example of Inamin. Inamin is a world-known company providing libraries of compounds for medicinal chemistry. They hold, by some estimates, about a half of the world's stock of compounds by diversity. They're very famous. They are typically published in high-profile journals like Nature, Angewandte Chemie, Journal of American Chemical Society, and they have collaborations with many world-known companies as well as academicians. For example, I know that Pavel Mikhailuk, who works in Inamin, has a collaboration with Phil Barron, with whom he did a Fulbright scholarship. And these pockets of success are quite local, but they keep growing. And I hope that they can be kind of like crystals inducing crystallization that will help more and more scientists to up their game and do greater and better research. With the war, there have been a lot of institutional pressures. The obvious one comes from the redirection of budget to the defense efforts. And this has impacted both academia and industry, as well as a lot of uncertainty that has degraded business environment in Ukraine in these times. I have spoken with my friends at universities, and all of them report that there are significant cuts in both funding and personnel. One of my friends said that at his institution, a quarter of people were laid off, a quarter of scientists were laid off. Others told me that their current financing was slashed by 25 to 40%, depending on the projects. And almost as a period in the sentence of scientific research in this year was news that Ukrainian equivalent of NSF will not be accepting proposals for the next year at all. And continued projects would be only funded at 50%. So there's a lot of pressure to be innovative and creative, but also a lot of pressure to simply survive. And this not only affects academia with state-provided funding, but also with research done in chemical companies and in the industry. So, for example, in many companies, I believe revenues are down by about a third, which is a huge blow to any business, even in good times, and particularly bad if you have continuous strikes and missiles break up infrastructure And just last week, we had a massive barrage of missiles attacking power plants. I myself had tried to speak with my parents, but we usually Skype, and we had to try 5 times to establish a connection. And once I could see them, it was extremely painful to see them sitting by the candlelight in the 21st century. And even that I could only manage for about 5 seconds before our connection broke. Their power was restored by midnight of the day. Next day there was more missiles, and they lost it again. And thankfully now power is restored, but the same cannot be said for all regions of Ukraine. And about a third of energy infrastructure was knocked down in that 2 days of attack. My former professor and now dean of my school of chemistry department, once this attack began, he posted a message to his students that all education moves online for at least a week, but you cannot have Zoom sessions if you don't have electricity. So there is still a continuing price that Ukrainians pay, both regular citizens and scientists as well. And I feel there's immense bravery in people who go to work, even though they are under threats of being killed. I know that almost all organizations in Ukraine now work as usual. So universities, chemical companies, and all institutions work even though there is a threat to life of all employees. People adapt, and there are bomb shelters installed almost everywhere. But it is very difficult to write a research paper if you have air sirens blasting in your ears and you have to hide your body from harm in a bathtub, as my friend told me. So there is a lot of challenges that people face, not only on the normal level, like grad school is difficult at best of times, and people often struggle to publish good papers in high-ranking journals. But this is doubly difficult if you have to also manage your safety, and also as you worry for your friends and families. Now, what can be done about the situation? The first, I think, is the integration of Ukrainian science into European and American scientific space. So there has been not much of communication, and people often struggle to go to conferences and establish scientific links. And I think that's the greatest impact that can be done with the least financial sacrifices. That being said, when I speak to people, majority of them say that without additional monetary sacrifices and investments, little can be done, as infrastructure is physically destroyed and even wiped out, as many cities and towns were physically erased from the map. For example, Mariupol in the southeast of Ukraine, or many smaller cities. And all this physical infrastructure has to be restored, and that, of course, costs a lot. But also there is an element of possibility for human support, for example, in a system of micro-scholarships. So it costs here about $3,000-4,000 to pay to a grad student to do research in an academic setting. In Ukraine, for the same money, you can fund 10 researchers doing their work. So even with little investments, you can have a disproportionately high impact on people and researchers. There has been precedence of such approach. There was a Soros Foundation, which directly solicited proposals from Ukrainian scientists and reports about their research, and then paid scholarships directly to them in Ukraine. There has been a lot of progress in supporting scientists who emigrated. For example, Maria Skłodowska-Curie Foundation provided a $25 million investments for scientists at risk. And I think such programs should definitely continue, and they play a huge role in supporting those who have left. But there is a reverse side of this coin, in that it provides some support for Ukrainian scientists who have left the country, but it also stimulates brain drain and loss of expertise inside the country. So financing of the scientists and projects who remain in Ukraine, I think would be a very prudent investment that would have high impact at low costs. And lastly, I would like to make a point that No matter what, Ukraine continues to fight. People's perseverance is as high as ever, and the victory will be ours. And thank you for your support. I know that ACS and other American organizations have provided a lot of investments and money to support Ukraine and Ukrainian scientists. And this help is greatly, greatly appreciated. And lastly, thank you for your attention.
Now,
Very well said. Thank you.
I think all of us are awake now after hearing Andre, and thank you so much. Now I would like to introduce Richard Stone, who will be joining us virtually. Richard Stone is the Senior Science Editor of HHM IT Tangled Bank Studios, where he oversees science content for documentaries and other non-fiction productions and manages media partnerships. Prior to joining his current company, Stone was the international news editor at Science Magazine, where his writing often featured datelines from challenging reporting environments such as Cuba, Iran, and North Korea. Stone's experience in international science and education includes things as a Fulbright scholar at Rostov State University in Russia in 1995 and 96, and at Kazan National University in Kyrgyzstan in 2004 and 5. As a science writer, he has contributed to Discover, Smithsonian, and National Geographic magazines, and is the author of the nonfiction book Mammoth: The Resurrection of an Ice Age Giant. Please help me welcome Richard.
Well, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here. And I'm sorry that I'm appearing virtual, but I literally just got back from Ukraine from a reporting trip for Science Magazine. And it's wonderful timing. I can share some observations of on the ground situation there. I brought a few slides to help give you a picture of the lay of the land for scientists who have remained in country. I'm going to start a virtual presentation now. Let me do screen sharing here. Okay, I trust that this came up okay, and thanks again for that introduction. I'm with HHMI, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Tangled Bank Studios. I'm also contributing correspondent for Science Magazine. I was reporting from Ukraine for Science for an upcoming special report. I spent 10 days in Ukraine, October 1st to 10th, and managed to get to a variety of cities and visit various institutions. I'm going to take you on a little tour right now. Started off in Kiev, and as you can imagine, it is a country in the midst of war, and in one of the central squares, they have an exhibition of captured, destroyed Russian tanks and other vehicles, fragments of missiles, and so forth. It's a reminder to the local population and an attempt to boost morale that the Ukrainian military has been extremely effective. There's a wide perception on the ground there and by outside analysts that the Ukrainian army has turned the tide, and people in Ukraine down to the last person who I met are convinced that they will win the war. Just a matter of time, they pointed out. So there's across Ukraine, various cities, there are a lot of monuments that had been protected because of the shelling and the missile strikes. This is a monument to Volodymyr the Great, and this is in Kiev, overlooking a wonderful view of the river, near a pedestrian walkway that was damaged in the shelling last Monday. but this is a before and after. You can see the monument before the war, and then the types of protection they put around. They had installed right after the war began. So that is a scene you see across Ukraine. So scientifically, my visit started in Kiev. One of the institutes that was damaged by an attack was the Institute for Super Hard Materials. And the director there on the right is showing fragments of a missile that had damaged one of their research workshops, which you see there on the left. Kiev, for the most part, the scientific institutions suffered little direct damage. But this one on the outskirts of Kiev was hit, and they are in the process of trying to rebuild their damaged facilities there. This is the Academy of Sciences headquarters on the top left, near Shevchenko Park, short walk from Shevchenko, Kiev National University, and the beautiful red building on the bottom right. I had visited the Academy to interview the Academy president on the bottom left there, Dr. Anatoly Zagorodny, just a week before Kiev was hit by that massive missile and drone strike last Monday. So the Presidium building there on the left, all the windows facing the park were blown out. There was significant internal damage. Fortunately, there were very few staff working that day. Most were working remotely, and the few people in the building were unharmed. That's true as far as I know for the university buildings. There were 3 buildings of the university: the Red Building, Institute of Philology, and the Museum of Natural History that were struck as well, damaged. The casualties were people on the ground where the missile struck in the park. But it was a chilling day, as you can imagine. This was the first time downtown Kiev had been hit for months, and it really changed the perception of the war for the people in Kiev. Probably the most important place that I visited during my trip was Kharkiv. Kharkiv is just 25, 30 kilometers away from the Russian border in the far northeastern part of Ukraine. It's a major scientific city in Ukraine, and it suffered incredible damage. I'll show you some scenes of that. So everybody, for the most part in Ukraine, hears about air raid warnings through an app on their phone, which I downloaded, and you can see on the screen here. This is just like one day's worth of air raid warnings. The red button is the start of the air raid warning. There's a siren, tells you to take shelter. Then there's a message when the air raid warning is lifted with a little green button. So this was constantly happening throughout the day, especially in regions that are closer to Russia. So Kharkiv, there would be maybe 4 or 5 of these warnings each day. Until last Monday, people in other parts of the country, like Kiev or in the Western Ukraine, had gotten a little blasé about it. The air raid warnings would also be issued there as well, because the warning is issued when a missile is launched toward Ukraine, but it's not clear what the target is. So vast parts of the country get an air raid warning, and when it's resolved where the threat is, that's when the air raid warning lifts. So these usually last at least half an hour. The air raid warning, which culminated in the attack last Monday in Kiev, lasted 6 hours, I think. So until last Monday, a lot of people were kind of blasé about it. They wouldn't take shelter, but the attacks last Monday did change that significantly in the minds of many people in Kiev. So in Kharkiv, this is just one of the damaged buildings downtown on the right. So for the most part, people shelter in basements, in underground passages and so forth. In areas where there isn't a shelter readily available, they have built these freestanding shelters, as you see in the left here. This is near a bus station in one of Kharkiv's central squares. It would protect you from shrapnel, obviously not from a direct hit, but these kind of structures have recently been built, even though Kharkiv, the oblast, or the region, has largely been recaptured last September. Like I say, it's very close to the Russian border, so the threat of missiles and drone strikes is still quite worrisome there. So Kharkiv, I visited 2 institutes of the academy that took heavy fire, especially in March and April. The Institute for Single Crystals, you can see how they've sandbagged the windows there for a room with expensive equipment, mass spec machine right behind this researcher. The Institute of Physics and Technology in Kharkiv is the biggest research institute in all of Ukraine. It was heavily damaged. There's a relatively new project with the Department of Energy, neutron assembly at the Institute that was just being brought online before the war started. They were very lucky that the assembly was not hit directly, but it suffered a lot of superficial damage, and there was damage to the power line to the assembly. The Institute of Physics and Technology suffered immense damage, over 100 missile strikes to that facility alone. Bottom right, this is the Institute of Astronomy at Krasny National University. Krasny National University is a very highly rated institution in Ukraine. Its main administration building is on the central square in Kharkiv, across the square from the administration building, which was mostly destroyed. The facade is still standing, but the building itself has been gutted. And the administration building took a lot of damage from those blasts. The Institute of Astronomy was lucky; it was not hit. It's a beautiful place. Most of its researchers are now studying overseas. So the director and a handful of his staff have remained, but most of the leading researchers are now taking shelter in Poland and other countries. Chernobyl is a site that I've had a long interest in, and I visited Chernobyl for the first time in 1996, the 10-year anniversary of the accident that destroyed the Unit 4 reactor. So I prepared a report for Science Magazine about that, and have visited periodically over the years. This was my first visit to Chernobyl since the new safe confinement was erected, a massive arch structure, engineering marvel, and was slid over the damaged reactor for the safe decommissioning of the destroyed reactor and its fuel-containing materials, which are still extremely dangerous and are going to require new science to figure out how to handle. This is inside the control room, this picture inside the control room of the new safe confinement, and you can probably guess who that image is, the center of the bullseye, the man everybody loves to hate in Ukraine, the person who started the war. This is, as I mentioned, the Unit 4 reactor. It's under the new safe confinement now. This is the control panel for the Unit 4 reactor, which was the reason that the accident occurred. It was human error, and it was simply pressing the wrong button at the wrong time. And this Chernobyl researcher is pointing to that. So Chernobyl was occupied in the hours after the invasion began in February. It was occupied for about a month. The plant facilities were damaged, but fortunately, the Unit 4 shelter, the other reactors that have been shut down, and particularly dangerous, the spent fuel, both the wet spent fuel storage, the extremely hot spent fuel, and the dry spent fuel storage, those facilities were not damaged. The Ukrainian Academy of Sciences has an institute in Chernobyl Village that's for studying how to decommission the Unit 4 reactor and other problems. Their institute in Chernobyl Village was ransacked, and there was a vault with radioactive sources, extremely active sources that could be ingredients for a dirty bomb. The institute was out of contact with their laboratory in Chernobyl Village until mid-April. They didn't know the fate of those sources. They went in and they were greatly relieved to find that the sources were intact. The Russian soldiers had ransacked the institute but had not entered the vault with those sources. So that was a lucky near miss. Now, the day I visited Chernobyl, it was last Monday, and this was the day that Russia fired several dozen missiles and drones across the country, including Kiev. I was traveling up to Chernobyl by road with a couple of researchers, and we just stopped for coffee about halfway up, around 8:30 in the morning. And we heard a couple of distant thuds, like impacts. And we looked at each other and wondered what the heck's going on. And then we saw a missile just fly right overhead from east to west, so on the way to Western Ukraine. And then a second missile came whizzing by, almost the same flight path, about 20 seconds later. And then the third missile that came, I had the presence of mind to actually try to capture it on videotape. And I'm going to see if I can play this short movie, like 10-second movie. And if you look really carefully, I don't know if it's going to show up on the screen, but you may be able to spot the missile itself, but you'll hear the Ukrainian army trying to shoot it down. Okay, here we go here. So that is Anatoly Nosovsky, the director of the Institute of Nuclear Power Problems, who manages that laboratory in Chernobyl Village. I was ransacked. I was traveling with him up to see the Unit 4 reactor in their institute. It was pretty stunning to be there when the missile came flying overhead, and it was a very surreal day. No, sorry, trying to get back. Okay, this is where we stopped for coffee, and we were talking about it afterward, and amazed that we were taking it so well. But then when we tried to pick up our coffee cups, our hands were shaking. So we were definitely affected by it. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was very, I guess, making us actually very aware of what is going on right now in the Ukraine. So thank you. I will now introduce Dr. Daniel Cup. Daniel is a Senior Director, Research, Integrity, and Global Development for the American Chemical Society. In this role, he is responsible for the Publication Integrity Office, Partner Publishing, India Strategy, and Global Commission. Daniel received his PhD in Material Science and Engineering from the University of Pennsylvania and worked for the American Physical Society for nearly 24 years in their editorial office on Long Island before moving to ACS. He is an APS fellow and the current chair of the Committee on Publication Ethics. So please help me while I'm going down.
Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here today on day one, session one of this conference focused on science, technology, and human rights. I first want to thank the organizers of this session, especially Karen Flores Garcia, who couldn't be with us today, and of course, our moderator, Dorothy Phillips. I have to say that the first two speakers have painted a very vivid and clear picture of the impact of this invasion on the people of Ukraine and particularly the scientists. I don't have that experience, so I'll be talking at a little more distant from it, just sort of talking specifically to the publishing challenges associated with this invasion. The pursuit of scientific knowledge in the modern world is generally not an individual or isolated activity. Advances in sciences come at the heels of previous works and are built on past knowledge. Therefore, access to knowledge and a platform to share ideas are important pieces. To enhance and amplify discoveries, collaboration is key. So science must rise above geopolitical tensions. Today, I will focus on the actions taken by ACS Publications. However, before I speak to that, it is important that you first understand ACS Publications' general approach and perspectives towards scientific publication, because it better informs and puts into context our actions over the past 7 to 8 months. ACS Publications focuses on the researcher. We essentially place the researcher at the center of everything we do. Whether they are interacting with us as an author, a referee, or as a thought leader, we seek to support their interactions with us and help them interact with the broader research community. To advance chemistry and the chemical sciences, we need to foster and facilitate the researcher's ability to collaborate and share information. To do this, it's important that we create bridges and not boundaries or barriers. This has to be without regard to local, national, or international politics. This is fundamental to what we do and informs our actions. That is not to say that we flaunt or disregard national policies. We, of course, follow US law and policies with regard to international interactions. However, we do what we can to separate the individual researcher from any stigma associated with the action of their nation's institutions. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine, ACS joined 14 other publishers in condemning the action. We made it clear that war and the associated humanitarian crisis caused by the invasion must stop. The first step was to suspend all sales and marketing of products and services to institutions in Russia and Belarus. This included not accepting any open access payments on behalf of authors from the region. Next, as individual organizations, we worked on supporting affected colleagues and contractors while contributing to relief efforts for those in peril, especially Ukrainian researchers. However, every organization recognized the need to remain committed to the ideals of global scientific scholarship. We focused our actions on Russian and Belarusian institutions rather than the researchers, which is why we continue to publish and disseminate research in these regions. At ACS, we reached out to our members located in Ukraine to see what support they needed and to make sure they were okay. We sought ways to help researchers, especially those displaced, maintain contact with advances in their fields despite the disruptions to their life during these unsettling times. In particular, we explored ways to ensure that they retained access to publications throughout the year. Rather than reinvent the wheel, we leverage an existing program, Research for Life. Research for Life is a program supported by a number of institutions, the International Association of Scientific, Technical, and Medical Publishers, and over 200 publishing partners like the ACS. This program makes nearly 200,000 journals and books available to institutions from low and middle income countries for free or at significantly reduced prices. By granting all Ukrainian institutions access in this way, researchers are able to remotely access pertinent content. For Ukrainian researchers, this is the pathway by which they can receive all ACS publications content free of charge for the remainder of 2022. In fact, a recent blog post on the Research for Life site by Emmanuel Mugisha indicated that over 500 Ukrainian institutions have since registered on that site. While ACS publications have found ways to ensure that Ukrainian researchers can stay up to date on the most recent scientific results, we have also put into place practices to ensure that we maintain good ethical practice in regards to publications from researchers based in Russia and Belarus. Though we will not accept any form of monetary payment from these regions, we still retain a neutral approach in handling manuscripts from there. The Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE, of which I am currently chair, earlier this year reaffirmed its statement that editorial decisions should not be affected by the origins of the manuscript, including the nationality, ethnicity, political beliefs, race, or religion of the authors. Decisions to edit and publish should not be determined by the policies of governments or other agencies outside of the journal itself, except where a decision might place the journal in violation of applicable law. This statement was originally released in 2013 in relation to sanctions imposed on Iran. At that time, it was known that some publishers were cautioning editors and referees about handling papers from Iranian authors. After considerable discussions, COPE clarified its position by adding the clause, borrowed heavily from language developed by WAMI, which is the World Association of Medical Editors, to their code of conduct for journal editors. This statement, slightly modified from the 2013 statement, reaffirms the understanding that researchers have to be considered independent of the actions of their countries and political leaders, and that they retain the ability to share knowledge and collaborate in scientific endeavors. By retaining open collaborations in science, we support the idea that science has no boundaries, at least not in a geopolitical sense. In the same vein, it is also our responsibility to ensure that authors, no matter their background, are given credit that they deserve as contributors to scientific publications. As political pressures mount to sever all ties to Russia and Belarus, national policies have been enacted in parts of the world to isolate even researchers from participating on the international stage. Broad international collaborations that include Russian contributors have been instructed to remove authors from Russian institutions from publication bylines in direct conflict with standard ethical authorship practices, as laid out by COPE, WAMI, and ICMJE, which is the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. It is incumbent upon publishers to reinforce appropriate ethical standards in publications and find ways to support the recognition of all contributors in advancing science. This is obviously broader than ACS publications, so ACS remains at the table with other publishers to continue discussion and dialogue. I want to thank you all for your attention. Though small and insignificant in the light of ongoing challenges faced by the people of Ukraine, we hope that these small efforts will help keep the scientists up to date on the most recent advances in science and technology to help them rebuild and reconnect when this is all over. Our hearts go out to our colleagues in Ukraine, and we hope to see an end to the hostilities and peace in the near future. We all need to remain committed to building bridges, not borders, as we move forward. Thank you again.
Thank you, Nick. It's very good. I'd now like to introduce our last speaker, but remember, get your questions ready because we will go into a Q&A period after our last speaker. So I introduce Dr. Thomas Connolly. Tom Connolly is the Executive Director and CEO of the American Chemical Society. He retired from DuPont in December 2014, where he was Executive Vice President, Chief Innovation Officer. At DuPont, he led businesses and R&D organizations which were based in the US, Europe, and Asia. Tom graduated with highest honors from Princeton University with a degree in chemical engineering and economics. As a Winston Churchill Scholar, he received his doctorate in chemical engineering from the University of Cambridge. He has served in advisory roles to US government and the Republic of Singapore. And it's been my pleasure to work with Tom over these last almost 10 years. Okay, Tom. Oh, yes.
Thank you, Dorothy, for that kind introduction. I wanted to second Teresa's comments. It's great to be back here in person after 3+ years, about 3 years. And I'm very pleased to be part of this program on such an important subject. I would like to talk about the ACS response and some of the actions that we've taken. After the Russian unprovoked and illegal attack on Ukraine, we took a number of actions, the first of which was to make a public statement condemning the invasion. We recognized we needed to go much further than that. So we've definitely reached out to our members and our staff member in the Ukraine to see what type of help we could provide. Of course, the needs were more immediate and more about survival than they were about science at that point. Our single staff member in the Ukraine was able to move to her parents near the frontier with Moldova. And since then, she has moved with her parents to Moldova and continues her work there. We did, as Dan pointed out, suspend our commercial activities with institutions in Russia and Belarus, not simply the publications, but also for the CAS products that Dorothy described in her opening comments as well. But we were looking beyond that at additional measures that we could take to support the scientists of Ukraine. Okay, so as we all know, on the 24th of February, Russia did invade the Ukraine, expecting a quick victory. Of course, that didn't turn out at all. There were a couple of scenarios people envisioned. One was that Russia succeeded with their attack, precipitating a global humanitarian crisis. The other was that Russia would be pushed back or held in check and negotiations would ensue. Of course, neither of those happened, or maybe a combination of some of the elements of both happened. And that's where we are today with, and people in the room may have a better count, more than 5,000 refugees. Included in that total were thousands of scientists who have moved to neighboring countries such as Poland. So in response to this effort, the US National Academy of Sciences had already launched a program. They launched it last year with the descent of institutions within Afghanistan. They launched what they called their scientists and engineers exiled and displaced for development, or SEED for D program. And this was really to help scientists in Afghanistan. They've continued that program, working now with the Polish Academy of Science and the Ukraine Academies of Sciences to support Ukrainian researchers. So they launched what they called, under their Seed for D program, the Safe Passage Fund, to help Ukrainian scientists and their families who were forced to flee Ukraine to establish themselves, both to support their work, but also humanitarian aid to support the families of those researchers. The efforts are being done, and scientists are being housed in Poland at the various research institutes in Poland. And the program can foresee working with Ukrainian scientists elsewhere. The National Academy of Science, the US National Academy of Science, covers all the administrative expenses associated with the Safe Passage Fund. And this fund is open to contributions by individuals. I have done so, and you can certainly do so by visiting the NAS website. ACS took an unprecedented step, at least it was unprecedented step for us. The board of directors, of which Dorothy is a member, voted in May of this year to contribute $500,000 to the NAS Seed for D program, specifically directed toward the Ukraine. I would say on a US level, through our DEIR programs, we support on an annual basis many times this amount. But for us to take a step to support scientists internationally, this was without precedent. The practice of chemistry is global, and an increasing number of the members of ACS are resident outside the US. And the board acted quickly to take this unprecedented step. The program initially supported, as I mentioned, Ukrainian scientists and their work while exiled, if you will, mostly in Poland, but also available for funding elsewhere. The funding was specified. There was one pool of funding as American Chemical Society. We wanted to make sure that that chemical scientists were included within the scientists being supported, but there's no attempt to segregate the funds or earmark it in any way. I would say that we're proud to be part of this program, working with the National Academy of Science and a number of other foundations, the David and Lucille Packer Foundation, Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and the Simons Foundation are among those who have stepped forward with significantly larger amounts to support this effort. And they, as I mentioned, are helping scientists from all disciplines. Now, a few things to date. I can give you some statistics. There are 400 Ukrainian researchers being supported, and they're all now resident at various scientific institutions under the Polish Academy of Science. I would also point out that there are virtually all women at this point. Men are required in Ukraine to help with the conduct of the war. And so the numbers are overwhelmingly women, perhaps not exclusively women, but at this point, that's what it looks like. Even from the earliest days of this effort, there was an understanding that funds would be later needed to rebuild infrastructure, scientific infrastructure within Ukraine. So we'd always thought about what's the next phase of the program. Of course, the current phase is lasting far longer than we've realized. So what is the current stage? And I think it's been really well described by both Andre and Richard with their observations. So I really cannot add to what they've already said. Ukraine has withstood the initial shock of the invasion, and Eastern Ukraine is a war zone, and you saw vivid pictures of those images. In Western Ukraine, life is comparatively normal. If you can say anything in a country at war is being normal. So millions have fled, but Ukraine has not fallen. Scientists, and the overwhelming majority of the scientists are still in the Ukraine. We've talked about those who have left, but there are absolutely no resources to rebuild basic infrastructure, let alone the scientific infrastructure within the Ukraine. All resources are being consumed by the war effort. So the national academies of the US, Ukraine, and Poland are talking about how to move forward with this holding pattern. And I think, again, Andre described well the fact that there are many of the scientists, the overwhelming majority of the scientists are still in the country, and where it's almost impossible to continue to conduct research in any predictable fashion. And we have a generation of scientists, if you will, at critical points in their education or in establish themselves early in their careers, who are losing valuable, perhaps even irreplaceable years in their career. So that is really become the attention of the three national academies as they look at this situation. And now the thinking is going on to what should be the next phase of this effort. And these are some of the things that are under consideration. So we're really talking about what could be next for this program. And what they're talking about is launching a program for research funding that would be a cross-boundary program with supporting principal investigators who are resident in institutes in Poland, but involving scientists who are still resident in the Ukraine. The projects would be led by those PIs involving teams of scientists, initially setting up 10 to 15 different teams across various disciplines, each with 5 to 10 researchers associated with them. Clearly, there are a lot of details for this arrangement that need to be worked out. And as it moves forward, it could be very different from what I'm describing today. But what I'm trying to present is the current thinking with this. They're also looking at opportunities for U.S. scientist involvement in evaluation of proposals or mentoring of teams or other activities. And there is potential for U.S. Funding agency participation in this program as well. So all things are on the table. And one thing I failed to point out is there are also discussions underway to allow Ukraine scientists, including male scientists, to spend short times in Poland at the institutes where the experimental work is more easily conducted. So all of these things are under consideration. And so I'll stop at this point and say, stay tuned because you will hear about future developments, and please do consider making a personal contribution to this effort. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. So hopefully you have, we'll attempt to inform you about what is happening on the ground, to inform you what is being done from the publication standpoint, and the efforts and hopefully future efforts of the associations and what you can do personally to get involved. So now with the remainder of our time, which is perfect, we have a question and answers, and some of the questions will come virtually and others will come from the audience. And you can direct those to a specific speaker or raise it in journal and they will in turn reply. So I'm gonna take a seat here with them and listen for your questions. We have two mics here on the floor that you can come up to ask your question so those online can hear you. And then we have some that we will be handing to us from those online.
Thank you. I've got some of the questions from online to share with you. So while folks here in the room are getting ready, Andre, the question is, thank you for your remarks and giving us a sense of the realities for Ukrainians.
how are or can international scientific organizations help in planning for a future recovery and rebuilding of Ukraine's scientific field?
Thank you for the question. I think there can be different levels of support that international organizations can provide. So it will be from a personal one. So this is a question of say positions or collaboration with researchers who are on the ground, as well as maybe opportunities for scientific exchange. So for example, programs for visiting scholars or graduate school positions and stuff like that. On the broader level, we can have collaborations. Say two teams team up to work on the same project, and there were wonderful opportunities as in here for division of labor. There have been very efficient collaborations in the past. For example, we need to have more labor-intensive projects. We just very device to devise and where you do more sort of time concentrated efforts in the more expensive Western jurisdictions, and say do all sorts of more labor-intensive and human-intensive efforts to Ukraine. Similar or as to the idea of outsourcing some particular operations. On the bigger level, I think there's also an opportunity for, once the war is over, to fund the research infrastructure. There are some unique equipment and instruments that Ukraine has that could benefit from additional funds to restore either if they were damaged by war or if they were just becoming obsolete. And I think there are opportunities here to have a lot of impact with very targeted and point applied resources. So that would be my ideas on this. So personal input on science, either through some scholarship or acquisition, as well as impact on organizations by supporting restoration and physical scientific infrastructure. Thank you.
Okay. Before we take the next question, there any comments from any of the other members of the panel on that question? No. Dan, did you? All set. Okay. All right. So now we will take a question from the audience. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Hi. My name is Mindy Reiser. I served on the steering committee of the Science and Human Rights Coalition of AAAS. I am a social scientist, but that's sometimes considered science. My question is one that maybe the State Department could answer as well, but I don't know if anybody is here. It's the question of what is happening to the scientific endeavor in Russia and probably also Belarus. We know that there's been a crackdown on freedom of expression, and I would expect there are some aspects of science that do not sit well with Mr. Putin. I wonder what knowledge you folks might have on that. And I know this is, we're focusing on Ukraine, but we also obviously are having implications from what's happening in science in Russia for what will happen if things don't go well in Ukraine. So what can you share about what you know of what the fate of scientists now is in Russia and Belarus?
From a publishing standpoint or perspective, we do understand that there's been a sort of a decrease in communication with a lot of scientists in Russia and Belarus. It is clear that the government there has focused negatively on sort of the West's sort of denunciation of the invasion and all the support for the Ukraine. And so they have sort of pulled back some of their scientists from even reaching out to the West for publication venues outside of Russia. at least had some of the things we've seen, and so it's maybe a little bit of interpretation. But that's my understanding of what's happening with scientists. Many of them, or some of them, are outspoken about the politics of Russia. You know, historically, people like Sakharov and others have been very outspoken, and so usually in this type of thing, when there's a crackdown like this, the scientists are greatly affected and try to be silent.
I could add some sort of the topic as well. First of all, I would like to say that autocrats are always afraid of people who consent. And this has been illustrated again and again and again in Russia as Putin's regime has been strengthened, as there has been a crackdown on free thought and expression of opinions and speech. This goes not only to science, but even to the most, I would say, ridiculous situations when there has been, on a few occasions, people arrested for simply standing in the street like this, with holding an imaginary protest sign, and police grab people and throw them in jail, just pretending to protest with just having your hands like this, as if you were holding something. With science, I think there is a place for distinction. So there is a number of researchers and scientists who are against the war, and they really understand what's going on. They do not support the invasion of Crimea. A lot of them, of course, try to get out of Russia because their political beliefs are death warrant, and people are and have been killed for a long time in Russia for their political beliefs. On the other hand, you have court scientists who are kind of like a systemic opposition, kind of like a puppy who is supposed to bark at a notice from his master. And I'm speaking specifically about a letter published by the League of, I think, a number of presidents of Russian universities who openly supported the war and said that, oh, everything is right, like the Tsar knows what he is doing. So I think it's important to separate those who are actually against the regime versus those who are in the military power and were like installed by the regime or benefit from its distribution of funding. And we cannot have any, I think, compassion for those who serve to evil, knowing what it is. But there is a lot of people who are innocent of the crimes of the government, and I think they should be supported in their opposition in struggle. There is a lot of efforts right now in Russia to stifle dissent, and in particular, it has given rise to a phenomenon when people who are likely to rebel are conscripted to the army. They have right now a large mobilization effort going on to conscript basically everyone they can. Just a few days ago, there was an incident when a pilot from an airplane was conscripted right in the plane as he was about to depart to Turkey. And basically, people were asked to leave the plane. And it has similar situations with scientists as well, really. I don't think there's any preference. There are also some moments of distrust of a certain government to its science engineers. I think a couple months ago, I read about a case when Russian FSB, which is Federal Security Bureau, which is basically an heir to the KGB, they have arrested a radio engineer for, as they claim, national security concerns, as if he was like selling state secrets, which was like his own work that he tried to publish. But these cases, they're often evidence of corruption. If an officer in the FSB security service has the power to put anyone he wishes to jail, he can simply use it for his personal gain to embarrass the people. And there are numerous examples of such tactics. Regarding the fate of those who remain still in Russia, I believe the majority of them have to hide their beliefs. And if you speak out against the regime, you will go to jail and perhaps even you will suffer greater consequences. However, I would like also to make a very special point here is that, as many Ukrainians and Ukrainian scientists with colleagues in Russia have found, intelligence and commitment to research do not correlate at all with political stance on liberty and authoritarianism. There is a lot of very smart people, very highly educated professors and other scientists who supported war, from their political beliefs. And you cannot convince them by arguments. It's not a matter of finding the rational words to change their beliefs. So I think there's also an opportunity here to study in greater detail how people choose their beliefs and how they choose what they support. And I think it does not often come only from the, say, rational logic. Also, it has to be spoken about, say, emotional intelligence and empathy. And those are distinct from purely scientific expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, did you want to make a comment on that question?
Yeah, just to add briefly, an official with the Max Planck Society told me a few months ago, I asked him under what conditions would you ever be able to collaborate again with the Russian Academy of Sciences after the war ends. And he said, not until the entire leadership changes would we even consider it. So it may take quite a while for Russian scientists, which are now ostracized, to have fruitful work with the West again. I think in the interim, they are going to be driven into the arms of China. They already have a lot of joint projects with China now, and China doesn't have any compunction about the war and about its impact on joint research ties. So I think Russian and Chinese research cooperation will flourish for the time being. Thank you.
So one thing I'm seeing in the chat is that the audio from the panel table is not working quite right. So when you respond, either go to the podium or make sure to talk right into the microphone. I think microphones are picking each other up. So please do that. There are two questions for you, Rich. One is, thank you for sharing pictures with Andrei's personal anecdotes and these pictures of science facilities. We truly get a sense of the difficulties faced by people trying to work. Can you share any perspectives or thoughts from the scientists you met with? And the other question for you is, we hear a lot about attacks on the, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Rich, in your trip, did you get insights into the plant and Ukrainian and global efforts to keep it safe?
Thanks for those questions. I'll try to be brief, as I know there's only a few minutes left in the session. Regarding thoughts and perspectives of Ukrainian scientists, Science Magazine published a Q&A with the president of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences on Friday. So I say he captures the current mood quite well. And my feature article for Science, which will come out hopefully next month, will have more thoughts from researchers on their current experiences. So if anyone is interested in following that coverage and doesn't have access to science, my email is rstone@hhmi.org. Regarding the Zaporizhzhia plant, I didn't get a chance to visit. It's in an active war zone, but it is a considerable safety risk. The area is under frequent shelling. The reactors have been shut down, but they still need to be water cooled. So electricity outages are risky, quite dangerous. And then the spent fuel itself is a huge risk. There's a lot of spent fuel stored at that facility. A missile strike on a spent fuel storage site it could release a lot of contamination. So that is perceived to be a very, very serious risk. Thanks.
Maybe before the next one, any other comments from the other panel members? Okay.
Another attendee says, thanks, Daniel, for your perspective. Do you have any insight on whether international scientists can support or collaborate with Ukrainian scientists through publication entities?
Well, I think as Andre had responded to a previous question, I think there was opportunities, and actually as Tom had mentioned, with the display scientist, there's always the opportunity to conduct research and to publish appropriately within the journals. I think there's a great opportunity to keep the Ukrainian researchers up to date on scientific advances through Research for Life. So that hopefully soon, when everything returns to something close to normal, they can come back into the scientific publication realm and be even stronger than they have been in the past. So I think there's plenty of opportunities for collaboration.
Anything else?
There's one last question from the chat, which we can take, and then we'll have time for closing remarks, I think. There is a phrase, the fog of war, which refers to the way that judgment may be skewed by the passions of war. How have you kept a steady hand on the wheel in balancing ethics with passion in response to this tragic invasion?
That's a very good question. It is a very strong concern. It is exactly the type of conversations that occur within the council and the board of code. We wish to maintain that sort of that higher level of publication ethics. While we understand that there is a human nature and emotional aspect of impact of what's going on. As was noted with the letter from the Regents from universities, it really cast a very big shadow on, I think, sort of Russian scientific community, the Russian research community, in that light that the leaders of these organizations, mainly political in nature as opposed to scientific, really did some damage. But as I said, it is necessary to look at each researcher individually and judge them based on the type of person, what they do within the effort, and to try to maintain a sort of equal footing, even during these trying times.
I think ethics versus passion is a very good point to bring here. So obviously compassion is ethical, and I think there's a moral duty to stand up for what is right. I myself, I feel that my best contribution to this effort is through donations and informational outreach. If I can be here and bring you maybe not full Ukrainian perspective, because I do not quite feel that I deserve to be called Ukrainian in the same way as people who survive and fight and win this war are. But I feel that anyone can help even a little bit. And there's no job too small. and there's no help too small as well. I know people who are unemployed in Ukraine because they lost their jobs, and they still donate even like few dollars to the army to support the victory and saving people. I would also like to bring the point of fog of war here, which was mentioned. Once the invasion started and Russians occupied certain parts of Ukrainian territories, there were very slim notions of what was going on under their occupation. Once north of Ukraine was liberated and in towns of Bucha and Irpin, we saw practical signs of genocide. Fog of war became an expression with a heavy burden to it. There are still a lot of regions that are occupied in the south and east of Ukraine. Recently, they had liberated a town of Izum, and they found a mass grave of, I believe, 500 people a week after. So there's certainly a lot of going on that we do not know about, that is going under Russian occupation. And it poses a challenge, because if it is indeed a genocide in the legal sense of the word, and you don't have to take my word for it, you can read Timothy Snyder's articles about it. I believe he is as unbiased person as we can find, who is an expert on this issue. It poses a question of like, what help is enough? Is it ethical to donate $500 and be happy that you've done your mark? Is there a moral duty to burn yourself to save someone else? And this question is answered, I guess, differently by every person, whoever decides what they can do. But I think it is important to ask this question and for everyone to ponder and consider it. Thank you.
Okay. I want to thank our speakers and to thank the audience for your attention, and both here and those virtual attendees. I feel that we have at least opened and maybe given you some additional thought about the right to science and what is happening for the people of Ukraine. Russia's invasion poses many human rights challenges, including the right to science. And unless there's additional comment from one of our panelists, we will now pause a moment. Is there any additional comment, anything from our panelists?
No, thank you.
Okay, if not, again, thank you for your attention, and some of us will be around for a while if you have additional questions once we leave the podium. So thank you also for AAAS for having this session. And let me make one other comment before I stop. Karen Flores Garcia was one of the key organizers. She's a member of the ACS staff. And she could not be with us today, but I have to say hats off to Karen working with us and with Nate to put this session together. So thank you.